flamboyant, seasoned, colourful, a friend of New Zealand and buffoon-like. Always the new British Prime Minister Boris Johnson is being described by politicians here. Surprisingly, the buffoon comment came from the leader of the National Party, a party on the same side of politics as the Tories. But more broadly, the main concern is Mr Johnson's determination to take Britain out of the European Union by the end of October, deal or no deal, and what that will mean for countries like New Zealand. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
Minister, thank you very much for having me here on this important anniversary day of your campaign of slaughter of rats and possums and stoats.
Boris Johnson is no stranger to New Zealand, having visited as Foreign Secretary in 2017 and even inspecting a tuatara at the Zealandia Wildlife Sanctuary in Wellington. During a media conference with the then Foreign Minister, National's Jerry Brownlee, Mr Johnson, a Brexiteer himself, was keen to say exiting the EU did not mean a more inward-looking Britain.
If I can just make one thing absolutely clear, I say this when I'm blue in the face. Brexit will not be about Britain turning away from the world. On the contrary.
Including trade and the broader relationship with countries like New Zealand.
Rediscovering and intensifying friendships and partnerships around the world. In trying to do that, we see New Zealand as at or near the front of the queue.
Nationals leader Simon Bridges was asked today how he'd describe Boris Johnson.
Mercurial, perhaps. I mean, look, this is a guy who can be on, can be off. He's got that buffoon-like quality, but I met him and I've got to say, millions have. But I think what's also true is having met him, he's very impressive. And there's much more to him than that. Very smart.
Mr Bridges was then asked what he meant by buffoon-like.
Well, I think it just means someone who, sometimes gets a bit of marmalade on his chin, who sometimes doesn't say quite the right things, whose personal life can be interesting, but for all of that, he's an impressive guy.
The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says she wouldn't use the word buffoon, but instead describes Boris Johnson as seasoned. She says her job is to work with whoever is in charge.
He knows New Zealand well, and that at least is a really positive starting point for our relationship, that he has that familiarity. I sent him a message saying kia ora Boris, and he sent one back, kia ora Jacinda, so at least we've got off to some familiar terms.
The New Zealand Foreign Minister Winston Peters is a long-time fan of Britain's new leader.
He has a very kind and very affectionate stance towards New Zealand. It means that we sort of start with them coming in, we hit the ground running in terms of our future relationship.
The UK can't formally sign trade deals until it leaves the EU, but it has already been talking to New Zealand about preparations for a future FTA. The Trade Minister David Parker says New Zealand's position is unchanged.
Until they complete the terms of their divorce from the European Union, neither we nor they can complete a new free trade agreement. But as soon as that is clarified, then we'll be rushing at that.
Simon Bridges says the UK will be highly motivated to do trade deals and that won't change under Boris Johnson. And he says even a no-deal Brexit would be good for New Zealand.
Our part of the world, look, that's got to be a good thing for us. It's a big market for us in wine and meat and a whole host of things.
Ms Ardern, however, is not so enthusiastic about the prospect of Britain crashing out of the EU with no deal.
We really were amongst the first cab off the rank for a trade agreement in a scenario where there's an orderly Brexit. Unfortunately, a no-deal Brexit means that there will be, let's be honest, a certain amount of chaos, and no one benefits from that, and New Zealand's included.
Jacinda Ardern hasn't met Boris Johnson personally, but expects to make his acquaintance at the United Nations General Assembly in September. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.